Hey, Bill, it's Julie here. As we look at that perhaps changing outlook for the dollar, I feel like I've heard this before, right? And not necessarily with regards to things like blockchain, but in other words, I've heard before, for example, oh, the Chinese are going to get rid of their U.S. treasuries or really work down their holdings and things along those lines. That stuff has not really materialized. So I wonder what's going to be the tipping point in your view.
Oh, it's a great question. And I think there's a big difference between what's happening now versus what's happened in the past and the discussions in the past with, potentially China being the biggest, new world reserve currency. So first of all, I'm not calling for one single reserve currency to take the place of the dollar. I think that in the case of China, there were a lot of questions about institutional strength and would global savings be comfortable sitting in a Chinese market where maybe the legal and regulatory framework isn't as worked out as it is in the West. What I think is likely to happen is with the US stepping back and with the increase of central bank digital currency technologies, we're seeing the Bank of International Settlements try to coordinate research and development by global central banks to put in a new plumbing or a new global payment system. We're also seeing a proliferation of regional trade agreements. The OECD and the WTO say that regional trade agreements are over 300 to date and are still growing. And this has been an accelerating pace. So what I think is going to happen is right now, a lot of international settlement, 85% of SWIFT settlement is actually US dollar based. And a lot of international settlement suffers from latency problems. It takes, several days to, transact. You have, expense problems. These, I think, will start to be addressed with blockchain technology, whether it's, on the private side through stable coins or on the public side through CBDC and interlinked payment systems. And then when you look at, these regional trade agreements or each country looking at who their trading partners actually are, does it make sense to take a third-party currency like the dollar and try to use that as the intermediary for trade between Australia and Singapore, for example? Or would it make more sense for Australia and Singapore to just transact on a bilateral basis? I believe the latter is the case. And I believe that we'll start to see more global central banks settle a lot of their domestic or their specific trade on a bilateral basis and removing the dollar from those settlements. What that'll do is it'll remove the dollar from the reserve currency the base that it currently has, because the dollar is about 60% of total central bank global reserves. The US economy is only 16% of the global economy. China is only 18% of the global economy. I don't think it makes sense for central banks to keep a reserve of any single currency above that 50% mark. So on a structural basis, I think that we're starting to see a move to this multipolar system that is going to be initially slow, but will eventually lead to a new structure of global payments and of reserve currency accumulation by central banks, which is specifically different than saying we're going to move from the dollar being replaced by the Chinese yuan as the dollar replaced the British pound. I think that
No,
this system is going to be different.
Bill, all of what you're saying sort of seems to make logical sense. And I take your point about China not necessarily being the alternative, right? But I guess I struggle with psychology and its role in all of this. And I mean, this is really a profound shift that you're talking about. And you talk about sort of lack of comfort with China as the reserve currency because of its regulatory regime there. I wonder, though, about a lack of comfort with a wholesale reworking of the global financial system.
It's already underway. So Project Dunbar which is a project that's been initiated by the BIS, is connecting a lot of Asian central banks from Australia to Malaysia. It actually even includes the Reserve Bank of Australia. and they're developing a multinational payment system via the CBDC channel. We have already seen that the regional trade agreements in Europe, from RCEP to CPTPP and many others, have picked up. We've also seen that China has, been doing a lot of bilateral settlement for commodities that they're picking up, and we've seen the dollar slowly starting to, erode from, the extremely overheld levels that it has been in global reserve currency stocks to, now it's about 60%. I think we're starting to see the cracks in the iceberg. And I think it's a natural flow. If you start to say that the US is stepping back from underwriting all global trade and global order, and we're going to start to see a lot more, regional based trade and, regional, focused partnerships. I think that this is just a natural outcome of, what has started on the margin. And then one final point, when we look at the global savings in the US, it's very large. Like the U.S. net international investment position is $14 trillion. That's up from $4 trillion in 2008. But what does that actually mean? The U.S. has underwritten global consumption for decades. Basically, the U.S. consumes. We buy goods. We give dollars to foreigners. And what has happened is most of those dollars have been recycled back into the U.S. with purchases of stocks, bonds, and other U.S. assets. Well, if we start to see a little bit of an erosion in the dollar, and we start to say, foreigners may start to say, look, if global central banks are not recycling dollars, their trade dollars back into the US dollar, and if we see a little bit of repatriation, I think that, the potential for a larger unwind is actually there. That the global savings that sits in the US is pretty much at its limit. And, as we move forward and as opportunities arise globally and, especially due to new regional trade agreements, we could see some of those dollars be sold and brought back into different regions of the world. And that would also, I think, accelerate, a structural downward move in the dollar. So I think that, there are a lot of items that, are just kind of waiting to be tipped over. And I think that potentially the catalyst here is the new, CBDC and blockchain technology that is allowing, much more global trade and global interaction to happen at a quicker pace and at a cheaper cost.